Thank you so much for being here and agreeing to speak with us. I thought we might start with, for the listeners' benefit, to introduce yourselves through your ancestors. Who are your old people? Maybe start with you, Victoria.
Yes, I like that. Thanks for having us. And I'm Victoria, hailing from what I like to call Bridget's Isles. And my ancestors are really a long line of grandmothers, many of whom I was lucky enough to actually share space with and grow up, I think 4 generations. Was it 4? So, yeah. 5 generations of grandmothers, and of course all other family members too, but mostly all from that part of the world, what we now call Wales, Scotland, Ireland, England. And I've been living in this southern land though for the last nearly 30 years. That's me.
Thanks.
Yes, a mix of ancestors. So my mother's mother was born on our traditional country of our mob, Wakaya mob, who are from up the Gulf of Carpentaria way, near the Queensland-NT border. And of course all her ancestors for 60,000 years were around there. And also have English ancestry from my mum's side of the family. My dad is from the Philippines, and he's got quite a mix of things going on there as well. German, Spanish, Chinese, local Filipino. Some of his ancestors were, of course, Spanish invaders of the Philippines several centuries ago. So quite a mixture.
And what's your relationships with your old people? Like, what do your ancestors, how do they live through you in a day-to-day sense? Or do they?
I'd like them to live through me more, which is my own shortcoming for not have attended to that enough probably. Spending a lot of time in my life dabbling around in other cultures, which I'm very grateful for, such as, cultures of the Indian subcontinent and wonderful wisdoms and practices that I've spent many years learning and practicing. I don't regret doing those things, but it's taken me a long time to realise the disconnect I have from my own cultural roots and ancestry. And that's something that I'm only now, near age 50, starting to properly attend to, and learning the indigenous practices of where my bones hail from, and what my ancestors, how they may have been in right relationship with life and with earth, and bringing that into my own life. Yeah, that's what I'm up to at the moment. A lot of exploration in Celtic and Druidic and practices and culture.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm getting daily guidance from ancestors, but I do feel glimpses and inklings of wisdoms and directions from, I guess, a broader range of not just human ancestors, but more than human ancestors in different aspects of country that I'm able to connect with every so often, and that's something I'd also like more of too. Yeah. So I've also been doing, getting into some Druidic stuff inspired by Victoria, and connecting with that English side of my ancestry from Bridget's Isles as well.
Yeah, we're living in such a fragmented world. But the invitation that I've felt very strong from Indigenous wisdom holders like Martin Prechtel is to get in touch with, each of us to get in touch with our Indigenous soul, that it's not dead. And so that's where I wanted to start the conversation, is that because knowing you both a little bit, getting to know you more over the last year or more, you seem to be both, that seems to be maybe not that language, but that it seems to be very much where you are both. And I find it really interesting because for me Druidism is, I'm connected through this 50-year-old oak tree in our garden, and I haven't really looked into Druidism because every time I have, there's this dead end of a colonial nation, being the Roman Empire, being the reporters yes. of that oral culture, and not wanting to be inframed by that, mostly derogatory framing. But some of the things that I guess I take dear is just how the cathedrals, for want of a better word, are the oak forests, and the teachers are specific oak trees. Like this is a kind of common recorded. I don't know if it's too extreme to say fact, but this is the thing that I keep hearing, that these old people of my ancestry too are animist people who understand wisdom beyond human consciousness. And so, yeah, I'm really interested to hear what it sounds like both of you have formed this interest in modern Druidism. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but it's not it doesn't sound like it's a harking back, but it's a taking on something of the trace of Druidism. Do you want to both speak a bit about that?
Look, I think what you've said about the exploring indigeneity in general is the heart of the matter. And I feel like, in modernity, that there can be a lot of lip service about deference to indigeneity, almost as a politically correct acknowledgement, without actually understanding that it's the reason we're all in this mess is because we left behind, all of us globally, somewhat, some people it's more recent than others, indigeneity, which to me just means belonging to a place and following the law, L-O-R-E, law of that place. And so whether you want to call it Druidry, paganism, the animist tradition of that part of the world that was, mostly wiped out for sure. It's, for me, there is a bit of semantics going on. It's never lost because nature holds all the wisdoms. That's not to not to give full respect to the fact that it's terribly difficult to often unlock those wisdoms without the elders and the other generations passing it on. But it is still there. And sometimes even in one story that's been passed down and hasn't been lost. And there are several of those kind of stories within what you might call ancient Druidry that have survived. Certainly in places like Ireland, where colonisation happened later, and so they were able to hold on to those, what you might call indigenous wisdoms, for longer. And those stories are full, much more than from the first hearing that you would imagine, with all of those kind of keys to unlock those wisdoms of nature. So I have some resistance, I suppose, to hearing that it's all completely lost, because it can never all be completely lost.
Yeah, and that reminds me of what Indigenous friends have said over the years, that the land holds the language, the land holds the culture, and that's, to me, been an invitation to go and sit and listen and to do more practice that's in relationship with what I call Mother Country and what other friends call Mother Country. And what about you, Yin? What's alive for you with Druidism?
I'm just interested in traditions that hold, that channel wisdoms for our times, and the one that I've found seems to have a lot of those wisdoms. They resonate with me. I learn new stuff. I feel them, yeah, and sometimes they're tracing things back, but as we talked about already, it's all really just interpretations of the same underlying patterns of the cosmos in many varied forms that takes, and it's kind of like peering through a keyhole at a vast cavern that you can't really get to, but you know it's there.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, is there because you're both involved in a Druid group in Victoria, is that right?
Yeah, fairly recently involved, and that was very interesting to me, that it took me so long to stumble across these folk. But one of the things that I love about it is because they're not working in that sort of capitalist commercial framework, that unless you went looking, you wouldn't be seeing adverts and workshops, and so that's the first thing that really endears me to them. Not that there's not that there's anything wrong with people have to earn a crust, it's not.
Sure.
It's not necessarily wrong to bring those things into a marketing situation, but for me and what I was looking for, that was really beautiful, to be like, oh, you've been here all this time just quietly meeting in forests and doing beautiful things and unlocking nature's secrets, and yes, exploring and acknowledging the tension points of what it is to ancestrally belong to those traditions and be on this land. And I really was deeply impressed with the caliber of people and the sensitivity to those tension points. And just for me, it was obvious how these were people who were living, breathing wisdoms that were improving the world and their own lives. So that has had a big impression on me, and I feel really grateful to have discovered them. Yeah.
One of the things that I like about Krishnamurti is that he talks about the kind of non-guru, the problem of authority. And recently I heard Michael Greer, is it the Druid in the States? No, is it Michael Greer? Yeah. Talk about Druidism, modern Druidism, in a very similar way, that each person has a unique and unique relationship to a small patch of land, or the land in which they live in, that is not overseen by a sort of intellectual hierarchy or spiritual hierarchy, that it's a very direct spiritual relationship with more than human life. And I really resonate with that. I feel like that's what I have always been interested in. I've been watching people return to Christianity recently, and people who I have a lot of respect for, like Martin Shaw and Paul Kingsnorth, and just like noticing that their journey and being curious and open to it, but just not feeling at all that's a thing for me, mainly because of the mother aspect of the absence of the sacred feminine in the monotheistic or Abrahamic traditions. I find it just, just the erosion of feminine logic and consciousness, particularly in relation to the dark. And I feel like those monotheisms are very light-based, or one lopsided, and Martin Shaw and Paul Kingsnorth do talk about the problem of that, that there isn't such an integration between light and dark, the underworld and the sky world. But I really like what you were saying, Yin, about these are ancient patterns, and that when I think of Druids, I think of robes and period costume and things like that, and so I immediately like, I'm not interested in that. But what I am interested in is connecting to these ancient rhythms and cosmology, a kind of pre-industrial, pre-modernist cosmology that's held in our bones, in a deeper part of ourselves. And I have personally found that by being in forests a lot, sitting around a fire, listening to others, and also listening to myself. So I really resonate with that. I wouldn't necessarily call myself Druid, but I feel it feels really closely aligned. In terms of, there's a personal aspect to a spiritual practice, but then there's also what I find with both of you, and we'll get to some of the work that you're doing in a joint sense a little bit down the track, hopefully. But what I find is that there is more than just the personal spiritual practice, that you both hold a kind of revillaging around spiritual practice. Do you want to both speak to that a little?
Well, basically, wisdom is something that's enacted in the world. If you're not enacting, then it's not wisdom. So, and that gets to, I guess, one of the differences between monotheistic kind of approaches to spirituality or monotheistic religions and indigenous traditions is the focus is on immanence in indigenous traditions, not transcendence, or at least a blend of them both. And so it's about acting in the world, and so it's not just individual or personal, it's collective work. Spiritual work is collective work, and so that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, thinking about spiritual practice in the times we live in as yes, it's a way to reconnect and relearn the law of nature, but it's also for healing. And there's a lot of healing that needs to be done, and it can be very overwhelming, this sort of obsession on healing the individual, and how each individual has to just continually, interface with their own brokenness over and over again. And that's not to say that some level of individual questing is not important, but from our perspective, there's way too much emphasis on that, and healing in collectives through gathering with a purpose to heal, but also just gathering to honour the cycles and seasons is automatically healing together, coming together to do those things. We're not alone, broken, alone individuals. We're in it together. And of course, that's not to say that it's all great. We're all going to go skipping off to the sunset when we realise this. It's terribly difficult to do, because being vulnerable with each other in the times we live, it actually is freaking dangerous. Like, it's when you have lots of traumatized people, and there's going to hurt people are going to hurt people, and it's not easy to do, and it needs to be done with great sensitivity, cultivation of discernment. But it can't be avoided if we want a future. We have to try and come together, or nobody has to do anything, but we feel that continuing to sensitively come together and navigate these things collectively is deeply important.
Learning together is spiritual.
Yes. And just being in life as a spiritual practice, rather than this sort of truncation of the world and the divine. Because the world is divine, and work is divine, and eating is divine, and the separation is the problem.
Yeah, I think ritual and ceremony has been a big part of this household's transition from what started as a very sort of politically minded and environmentally minded transition from what I called hyper-techno-civility, or hyper-modernity, or fossil fuel-based reality, or capitalist reality, whatever we want to call it, so looking at our resources, like, which are loaded with violence against the land and other animals, and even soils, and how to not participate, or participate less and less and less in those systems of mass death and destruction. So that was the beginning point. But after several years of that, where we're actually putting more and more food on our table, and we had origin stories about that. The next stage was like ritual and ceremony around gathering together to eat, and that's we're still the family that may sit on the couch and with a bowl of something and watch something. We're not less and less, like, we went quite purist for a while and then we needed to relax a bit, but so I think how ritual, particularly with children, like how ritual and ceremony becomes part of life, has been a big part of that, while also I think that we're not able to go, if we go too far from the dominant culture. Firstly, I've seen in our eldest boy that there's real pain and struggle there, but also that this kind of transition that we feel on, which is conscious, much more greater consciousness around how we live and make our life, which, as I said, necessitates ceremony, because gratitude is something that is a kind of byproduct of this way of living. But at the same time, being okay with, we can only do so much in this reclamation, in this reclaiming from modernity, in this generation, and that this is a generational, which is, again, getting back to, I guess, that common indigenous life thought of multiple generational thinking, and participation, seeing oneself in being, working towards being a good ancestor, while being with the trauma of our ancestors before us, that trauma living in us in many different ways. And I guess we could go anywhere here, but before we move into the projects that you're doing together at Anamkara, I wonder whether you could just spend a bit of time just identifying like what are the fundamental roadblocks of modernity, and you've spoken about this in your primers. What are the roadblocks to that you've found in your own life, but also see with others in terms of reclaiming a way of living that is honouring, that is land bonded?
Well, there's a lot of roadblocks, unfortunately, and not to be negative, but just keeping it real. And there's, so just to throw a few out there, I mean, I was just reflecting as you were describing so beautifully, Patrick, your, how you began and how it progressed. And I think there's a tendency for us modern humans, we don't do paradox very well, and we polarize everything and we want everything to be certain sure. So we're either, complete consumerist materialists, or we're going to have incredibly strict dogma with rules and regulations, and if you which is just another form of modernity, all these extreme levels of rules to keep you safe, in this case spiritually safe. You have to pray before each meal, and you have to and both things can so easily be co-opted, if you let go of that and say, oh well, we'll just do what we like, but we don't have discernment. Within 2 weeks you're having McDonald's every day. I mean, I'm being extreme, but there's some middle way of what we talk about as right relationship, that it's the cultivation of right relationship to make those choices as we are in modernity that becomes even more important. So knowing when we're becoming a little neurotic about some newfound spiritual truth, but gently and kindly and with a light heart. So that would definitely be one of them. And I think the other roadblock is when we start to want to tell everyone how it is. That's one to look out for. That gets very, very dangerous very quickly. What do you reckon, Yin?
Yeah. We talk about bridging medicines.
Yes.
And bridging ways of coming back to indigeneity. And there can be a lot of roadblocks on that bridge. But you can't just jump off into the river. You have to slowly wind your way across the bridge. Intergenerational work, as you say. And I think, staying with the trouble of the paradoxes is important, and realising your capacities in any given place, time, of what you can try and relinquish, what you can try and adopt. And so one of the biggest dangers of being on that bridging journey is thinking you've arrived. Needing to arrive, let's say. And that needing to arrive is a kind of impatience of modernity that comes from that deep purity discourse that we have. I have to be right, I have to be clean, I have to be free of complicity, and that's just not how it works in the world that we live in.
You've both been very much in the materiality of decolonization in your own lives. Obviously, Yin with Australian Indigenous heritage. This is and your scholarly work as an academic. Decolonization, we were speaking earlier, is, I think in your words, sweating the small stuff is actually really important. And it reminds me of the feedback we often get from Marxists or, young students, socialists saying, well, it's all very well. You've got this, bit of a quarter acre of stolen land that you're doing all this from. So therefore everything you do is shit. It's that kind of argument. And we're saying, well, what we're trying to do is look at the capitalisms of food, energy, and medicine and attend to those, because the bigger capitalism of land ownership is actually a longer project. It's a generational project of how we tend to that, but each household can actually attend to food, energy, and medicine in their own lifetime. And so it's, rather than, hostile back to that person who hasn't really thought about the various different capitalisms and what we can actually unshackle ourselves from in order to then grow a certain different life, in order for things like ritual and ceremony to come back into life. Like, that was our process, not because we knew where we were heading, but that we're still, we're constantly on that bridge that you were talking about. And, sometimes we've been car free for 15 years, which I think is one of my biggest achievements ever. And what that did was just slow me down, bike and walk speed for 15 years. But recently some friends went overseas, they dropped their car here. Woody's getting to an age where he needs to get to sports, and all of a sudden we're back in a car frame of mind. So this has been a big grief for me. But it's also like checking in and saying, well, this is just for this time, and there is steps backwards. This is not a linear thing, while at the same time leaning further into a whole lot of other things that are very, what we call the beautiful parts of our life, while also fessing up to the shit that we're still dragging behind us, like car travel. So yeah, I think, but it's I really liked what you were talking earlier, both of you, about the intimate work that's required in decolonization, and wondered whether you could both speak to that.
Yeah, I wanted to just, if you don't mind, respond to something you said, Patrick, which is part of that, the intimate, the inner work, which is that for me, when you tell that story about the car, and I think you said, it's a step backward, but I guess I don't see it that way, because part of decolonization, like the biggest part, I would argue, is, this return to right relationship. And right relationship isn't some utopian place where everything's perfect and nature's harmony is completely in balance. It's right now, interfacing with what is in front of us. That's where right relationship starts. And there's all sorts of risk versus benefit analysis that modern humans are feeling into to navigate this so-called bridge that we're talking about. And sometimes, for example, if you're a parent in modernity, there's some trade-offs. And it's sensing into those rather than making these rules and becoming rigid and not flowing. And so I feel like that is decolonizing work, even being humble to letting something go, some great ideal go sometimes. Yeah, I'm not meaning to tell you how to suck eggs, but it's just that is the decolon. That's the work, is to flow with all of this incredibly complex situation that cannot be remedied by rules and rigidity, and it can't be. And so that the intimate decolonizing, the inner decolonizing, for us, this is the really big arena of composting and hospicing modernity, as per the book by
Vanessa Andreotti.
Yeah, it's a hospicing situation here. We can't just withdraw all palliative care from our lives, as we're because we all have various dependencies on the system, whether we want them or not. And so this inner work of cultivating discernment and making choices as they arise is really where it's at from our perspective.
Yeah, and it is leaning into challenging choices, difficult contexts, but at the same time trying to let go of that modernist tendency to judge yourself and others, and to understand the bind that you that we're in, the multiple binds that we find ourselves in, that we can't. This has taken thousands of years to eventuate. We can't disentangle this Gordian knot in a lifetime, as we said, and that just, it's about staying with that, being with that pain of understanding that, but at the same time, I think wisdom is about learning to feel that pain more, but as you do that, it bothers you less.
Yeah, just then I had the image of myself as an old man dancing with oversized underpants on and just these skinny little legs, just kind of like a bit like Zero at the moment, just like letting it all go, and just like as some sort of practice of shaking and dancing.
And that's the thing, like we actually can still enjoy our lives in these times that we live in. Sometimes I think there's kind of like the earnest police or something, like, when you realise how shit everything has become, and we do think things have gotten pretty bad, but mostly, and we've got all sorts of pressures and stresses, and we're right in there with all the madness of modernity, even though we're living on a homestead and it's have that lovely stuff too. But we are having fun. Like we're still, like, it's possible to carve out a strange sort of light-hearted humour about all the without bypassing, feeling the pain and acknowledging just, there are some people who, of course, the level of oppression that they're under, that would be a very cruel thing to suggest, that, just be light-hearted. And, I'm not saying, but for us, we're fortunate enough to be in a position right now that that's very beneficial, to cultivate a bit of a light heart to the process, because, here we are. This is just what's arising in the times that we live in, so.
Yeah. I mean, just to go back to what you said earlier about the rules, like the rules being very much part of the colonial templating of culture, and even hidden rules, the sort of self-censorship that you see happening all the time, people concerned to say things, and, in certain situations, that's important, but at other times it's really good to say something inappropriate, because what it does is it pricks the possibility of a conversation being had. But there's such a pouncing, politically correct sort of anxiety that is in the culture, particularly what I've seen since I've left the university maybe 10 years ago, just how joy and play and dance and lightheartedness and flippancy and politically incorrectness, and just the possibility of using political incorrectness as a way of dancing or riffing is almost gone. I feel like in the more intellectual part of the culture, it's like it's such a safe zone, it's almost become numb. I mean, that's just my sort of peering into and disinterest in academia right now. I'd like you to speak to that, but I guess the bigger question is how rules, in terms of, particularly in the decolonization space, how there's so many rules about that, and yet, so it's just if you've got anything to add to that, the irony of that.
Yeah, well, there is an irony, and primal cultures, decolonized indigenous cultures, don't have rules. We have guidelines and protocols. Some stronger, some weaker, but there's a deep respect for personal autonomy. That's where fierce egalitarianism comes from, this idea that we all are able to choose, and it's a choosing within deep relationships, so it's a different sort of choosing to what we have here in modernity, but still a lot of respect for individual autonomy.
Yeah, I think like in that, yeah, I mean it's to have a vision of the ancestral village can only really, particularly I think for you and me, Victoria, because our ancestral villages were smashed a lot longer back, whereas you have ancestry that's, your ancestral villages are, if particularly in the north of Australia, are can even be relatively intact, or to some at least close proximity in terms of generational connection, whereas the enclosures started in the 12th century in the UK and so in Europe by the Middle Ages there was a lot of land bonded people becoming stripped of their land bondedness, and so that's a much further way back, but still it's a blimp in time, really, in real time, in cosmological time. So so I guess the tendency to romanticize what the village was is problematic, while at the same time the modernist concept of the village was never beautiful. It was never, it never had distributed roles, and it didn't have, what romantics say it had, and which apart from the literature, the academic literature, totally discounting that. And I'm thinking of books like Caliban and the Witch and Michael Perelman's Invention of Capital, or Capitalism, where he goes into all the strategies that were made to smash the peasantry and put them into the factories and the mines, all the stuff they had to do for the early capitalists to actually, to smash the land bondedness, because the land bondedness is a beautiful thing, and I guess where I'm heading with this is, we're now at this time where the rich countries like Australia, are in what I call an undevelopment or undeveloping, and so it makes sense. Therefore, it is also a time, psychically, to start to begin to think about reclaiming. Like, what is it? What are the meritorious aspects of the ancestral village, of the ancestral clan? And what can we rebuild, or what can we lean back into there, while at the same time heading into a completely unknown future with the collapse of this giant global civilization, and all the trauma and all the war and all the mess and the suffering that will and is coming from that.
Ultimately, if our species continues, we will come back to the village somewhat, whether we consciously decide it or not. But what will it look like, and especially in early times when there's still chaos and traumas, I don't know. But I think talking about the merits of that, I mean, there's so many things could be discussed about the lifestyle, the spiritual connection, the joy, the food, the not. But all you need to really look at is that for hundreds of thousands of years, our species didn't destroy the joint, and now we are. So, I mean, simply put, not destroying the joint is better, surely. It's a very easy argument, because yes, maybe we're getting some things wrong, and they're somewhat romanticizing, quite probably, because we don't know everything, but they didn't destroy the place. That's it. Living like that, there was at least that level of harmony. And if you look at what we've done to ourselves, and the cruelty to the other creatures and the environment and the trees, I mean, for me it's like, it's a no-brainer, like destroying the joint versus not destroying it. So it's obviously got some level of merit to live in community village life, because that is, better not to destroy your own home.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I worry about the whole discourse of romanticisation. Been hearing about it a fair bit, and I think really it's just a reasonably sophisticated modern defence mechanism to once again say, well, you're probably exaggerating that, meaning I don't like the feeling it gives me to think that there's a way that we lived that was better than how we live now. And even the notion of kind of passing out, it's PARSE, passing, or determining what has merit in primal cultures is a dangerous form of modern hubris. People live sustainably for hundreds of thousands of years. There's certain core features to culture with many diverse aspects of culture too. And as I say, the ancestors were and always will be wiser than us.
Particularly when you're passing, when it's a wisdom passing culture, whereas where a knowledge obsessed culture, where wisdom and healing is almost been eradicated, those words from the academy, which is supposed to be the place of wisdom, or at least high intelligence in the culture. And so it's so interesting to me how wisdom and healing are almost taboo, or if they're not taboo, they're being denigrated as things that maybe some Indigenous scholars could talk about, but ultimately, the real neoliberal academics will poo-poo them, as being just sort of a romantic drivel. I think, I guess, just to move away from what we know is the shit of I guess this great sort of global blob, toxiculture, whatever words we want to put around it, to the things that we're doing in our own lives and in our own communities that are making a difference, even though they are tiny and they're small and they're on such a small scale. But there's the whole thing that I guess Meg and I have discovered is the small is really powerful. And like lighting a fire and sitting in the forest with a bunch of men and Meg with a bunch of women every few weeks, and then with the bush school kids is so simple and yet so powerful, and holding the traces of that come back in, so that those little rituals and a place where people are communicating in a non-competitive, non-hierarchical way through the practice of deep listening. That to me is so simple as once new people come to the circle and they see how others are doing that, that's passed on how to sit in circle and to start to develop ways of listening that I certainly did not have before others showed me how to do that. And so the richness of our lives, and with Woody as well, because the bush school kids do it in a more playful sense, but it is still, I always say to the kids, you will always have really good relationships if you can listen to other people and their stories. Just see this as a skill, like we're teaching you how to use a knife and light fire and climb trees, and listening to each other is like a life skill that is really valuable. And if you can learn it now, because it took me decades to learn it, if you can learn it now, then you will always have friends. You'll always have good, close friends. And so I think just to introduce it that way, when there's, a couple of fidgety kids just kind of talking over others, and not holding that, again, too rulesy based, but appropriate to setting up a place where everyone can feel heard, particularly those who don't often say much. But that led me to Anam Cara, which is your... and I wanted to mention, because you mentioned the word homestead before, and on your website it says Anamkara homestead. I mean, homestead is like a sort of, by I guess, the politically correct is like a colonial term. But you take that word and it's much more than a colonial term. It has a colonial heritage, the pioneering heritage, but it's actually... What does that word... I mean, what does the three words together... do you want to unpack those?
Yeah. Well, the Anamkara is Irish Gaelic, loosely translated as soul friend. And I am not a scholar of that area at all, but there was just something about the notion of soul friend that I feel is so profoundly important. And because of my sort of beginning to make forays into the culture of my ancestors, that name Anamkara came in at that time, and hearing that particular translation, the work that we're trying to do through community and belonging to a certain place of land is to come back into kinship with ourselves and with each other, with all the other people who come and go, flow through the place, whether it's for 5 minutes, the electrician that's coming for the day, or a guest that stays for a year or ends up living with us. We want to be in kinship with life, kinship with all the creatures down to the smallest insect life, or the microbes in the soil, to the birds, to the kangaroos. And so soul friend, that's how that reads for me. Other people may take it a different way, as Anamkara, the Anamkara being a specific person that you engage within your life. But for me, that's how I interpret that phrase. And so it encapsulates, I guess, the work that we're doing, which is to try to return to that kind of kinship, deep kinship with life, with all the different elements of life. Homestead, well, I don't have anything profound to say about that. It wasn't really a planned term. It just sort of described the element of producing food and belonging to that patch of land. Yeah. Do you have any more thoughts on that word?
Yeah, I think for the first one, Anamkara, we're trying to evoke a kind of a sense of kinship, and as a soul-based or heart-connected form of friendship, a deeper form of connectedness. And I would say that kinship is the answer rather than love is the answer. You hear love is the answer a lot, and I don't really think love is quite, in the modern understanding of the word, doesn't really fully encompass what we mean by kinship. So we're trying to emphasise that part of it. And
would it be kinship both encompasses love but also responsibility? Obviously love, it comes with responsibility too, but is it, what else? Because kinship, when I think of kinship, it certainly embodies love, but it is more than that.
Well, kinship, love is a natural happening of kinship.
Yeah.
I lived for a while on a small island in the Hebrides, part of the Findhorn community, on a little island called Ariden community there, and I'd lived in all sorts of different communities. I've spent a lot of my life exploring communities of all different kinds, intentional, spiritual, accidental, institutional. And this one affected me really deeply because there was a certain feeling that began to happen, and it was like a falling in love with this group of people non-romantically in a way that I hadn't experienced en masse before. And I thought, well, what's happening here? Because it wasn't that I necessarily met each person. I thought, fantastic, we just, but nonetheless there was this feeling, and I realized that there were 4 things that took place that I believe automatically bond you in kinship, even as modern humans, very quickly, which is eating together, working together, playing together, praying together. And when those four things are happening, those cords of kinship, they start to entwine themselves. Even 24, 48 hours, it starts to happen. A lot of communities, there's not so much eating together, there's not much working together once a month work day or potluck every third week or something. That's not enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't form. And when you have cords of kinship, you cannot help but prioritize the wellness and the happiness and health of the others.
Yeah.
Is like the cord of kinship that you have with your children. And so the responsibility and love are just natural arisings of the cord. So if you create the circumstances for the cord, the other stuff will happen anyway.
Yeah, as opposed to this, once again, this modernist abstract idea of all you have to do is stop hating and love. Like it's some sort of mantra or in a modernist sense or a choice. It's kind of the same as saying, music is the answer, but all you ever do is think about music, you never play it. Kinship is the instrument that creates love.
It's the doing saying of, yeah. And I think, now that you've unpacked it, it makes really sense that how Anamkara being soul friend and homestead being the much more sleeves rolled up, pragmatic joining of that, so that one isn't just the spiritualism and one isn't just the agricultural necessity to belong in a place through it's the coming together of these things. And I think that's what that for us, arriving at a point saying, well, actually, we're just new peasants. In other words, we're becoming land bonded. We're emplacing as land bonded settlers or people whose ancestors have only been here for a very short period of time through very problematic circumstances. I have convicts right through to free settlers in my heritage, and Meg has Jewish heritage from Europe and Palestine. So, we have colonial stories, but that's not the sum of us. We are in the materiality of the shame of our ancestral disruption to indigenous, rich indigenous life here in this very country, but across Australia. But I think it's the recognizing for me that to stay in the pus of that story, it actually does is more harmful to myself and to others. So I guess another big thing that I know we've talked a little bit about, but another big part of this sort of putting the pieces of the village back together is the kind of missing aspects in modernity of initiation, mentorship, and eldership. There is mentorship in a kind of corporate sense, or mentorship seems to have more agency in modernity, but certainly rites of passage and eldership, or there's this notions around eldership that are really quite bizarre and disconnected to ancestral eldership. So I just wondered whether we could maybe close with comments around initiation and eldership and how they operate in terms of generational healing, but also being part of ancestor making.
They're hugely important, and they are things we can actually do right now, clumsily. But even in the early stages of us modern humans coming together and creating rites of passage for, let's say, young ones, that already has a profound impact on them, and it does have that ripple effect. Retrospective initiations for us who are older but never got those young ones, it will be powerful. Even even done clumsily, with a kind of acknowledgement that we're cobbling bits together of wisdoms that we've been lucky enough to stumble upon. It's powerful stuff. And the eldering also, that's a really difficult arena, because it's very hard to step into true elderhood without true elders guiding you in. But nonetheless, this is where we find ourselves. And so that is a very important job for us modern humans to begin to undertake. I can't emphasize enough. Rites of passage will change the world. I believe that really firmly. That's a very, very important reclamation that we can do even in these reduced circumstances. What do you think?
Yeah, rites of passage, initiations are invitations to maturation, and particularly potent forms of ritual and ceremony, and we need more of those. And it's hard to become an elder without, or as we like to say, to engage in eldering without those processes being part of those processes. Yeah, and there's few elders. There's little eldering that goes on, and there's very little rites of passage and initiations as well. And that's all part of what modernity has smashed over the centuries and millennia, because those are able to bring us out of the infantilization of modernity, and that's why they're so dangerous to modernity. Yeah, the first and most important step in creating colonial cultures is to stop people becoming real adults.
So in terms of knowing the importance of rites of passage and eldership, which is, as you say, a collective, more collective work. It can't be just done from a household. What are some of the things that you've participated in or been or aware of that's in this work, like within your own sphere or within your own like any stories that are like particularly alive for you right now in those things, in those areas that you'd like to share?
Well, we'd like to be doing a lot more, but our son Forrest recently, or last year, went through the local to this area rites of passage, boy to man, and that has been profound for him. It's really launched him into the most incredible sort of space of emotional maturity and accountability to himself. It's been amazing. The other level for him is just knowing that there's this group of men who are like that is such a soothing salve for him as he navigates his way. We live a long way from here, so he's been coming back to various events to check in, but just the knowing, he remembers it all the time, and it's very soothing to know that is there. That's really helps hold him whilst he navigates this strange world as a teenager. But I'd have to say that what was more unexpected for me was the healing for the whole family from being on the sidelines of this event. And that's been profound too. So that's one rite of passage, boy to man, and as a family we feel the ripple effects of that on a daily basis, I would say. Would you agree? It's been huge. Yeah, I'm so deeply grateful that there are a group of men who are striving for this and have been growing in wisdom it makes me very hopeful actually that exists. So that's probably the main one we've been involved with. We've had some tentative kind of forays into eldering at the homestead. There was a group that was forming, exploring that subject, so that's also been happening, but very much in its infancy. More looking at, what does it mean, coming together with ritual circles, that's what's been going on for us.
Yeah, it's difficult without the village, or I think the village is a stepping stone to the tribe, which we need to go back to. But without that density of relationality and relating, it's really, for me, it's finding groups like the Castleman Rites of Passage. I got a lot out of being on that with Forest. For eldering, it's like harvesting inklings of eldering as you go about life, and finding those rare people who do elder, sometimes at least, and consciously focusing on how they do that. That's how I've been doing that. And obviously, it would have been a lot easier in a tribe with so many opportunities to observe and emulate and learn from. But otherwise, it's in the Druiding group, in some men's work. There are people who, few friends of ours, and I think to myself, I'm paying close attention to what they do and how they do it.
Yeah, I relate to that. And as something else that was said earlier about the hubris of modernity, how there's so much claiming of eldership by older people, as if that thing you were talking about of already arriving. Whereas I think, the humility of knowing that we're walking in the dark a lot, and with all of this stuff that we're reclaiming, it's it's like we're still in preschool, I feel like, with much of this work, because and Indigenous writers that have really moved me, like Martin Prechtel, who describe the village that he was initiated into and the richness of that. There's a lot of generations to go before that level of beauty. And I think the story that really stands out is the man in grief who's intoxicated himself in the village, in one of Martin's books, and people gathering around to witness the grief without he's a drunk man judgment, but actually gathering around, not arresting his grief, but witnessing his grief. And the power of that story, it's moving through my body at the moment. I take that as what I'm leaning into, to be in a village where someone who is really vulnerable and turns to a substance is witnessed, and then after the grief episode is held and supported, rather than judged. And so the movement from judgment, I think, is, and in my own life, I'm just constantly hearing my judgment and recognizing that lineage that's been passed on. And
it's the not judging and not fixing. It's a witnessing and a catalyzing. Grief is collective, so to witness is to catalyze that grief, and that's a kind of way of, that's kinship as well, is getting beneath the surface and connecting with where people are at, not just the fact that they're drunk is where most people stop, but actually what's going on at the deeper levels of reality, and how can we container and catalyse that and help it flow through.
I think that one of the bridging medicines that we talk about is focusing on a culture of kindness right now. Kindness is not the same as niceness. Niceness can often mean skimming over, pretending, contractual relationships. Niceness can be the political correctness that can be bypassing suffering. I'm not talking about that, but deep kindness to ourselves and each other right now, because it's really, really hard being a human being in this world. Yes, there are greater degrees of oppression and suffering than others, but everyone is literally doing their best, sort of shuffling around trying to make sense of all of this. And I think that focusing on that cultivation of that culture of kindness while we move through this together, even if we don't think the same thing or believe the same things, for me that's super important. Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to end our conversation. Thank you. Thank you both.
Much, Patrick. Thank you.